Rarely do D&D campaigns finish. In our 20 years of experience, they were always just falling apart. But we managed to turn that around in the last 7 years or so.
Today we look at some of the causes for that, as well as how to fix them.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds.
Now let us defeat D&D fails for good.
So a big problem, throughout the years with our own D&D campaigns and other role-playing games is, we would start a new game, we'd play it for a little while, and then it would fizzle. And there's all kinds of different reasons why that would happen. But the net result is we never, ever finish the campaign. We've got so many lost and forgotten campaigns. It's like the Island of Misfit Toys, but with D&D campaigns instead. But I feel like more recently we kind of stumbled on some things that kind of helped us not have that happen, nearly as often or really at all.
It's a great point. And there's a number of things that are going to cause these situations, these DM fails or D&D fails. So let's get into it.
Yeah, because it's not always just the DM, but a big part of it is DM, GM burnout. This is definitely a thing that happens. Maybe you have a forever GM in your game, and, they're the ones that always are responsible for a lot of times they're responsible for, setting up the game, having it run, getting the players together, and then actually, coming up with all the content and creating all the material that the players are going to run through. So that becomes a lot. And when you do it over a long period of time, you tend to burn out. And also an idea that you were excited for in the beginning, I feel like it's a lot easier for you to lose that excitement because there's so many other components and so much of the responsibility ends up being on your shoulders.
Beyond, just the DM being the leader of this, guiding all of it, in some cases hosting on top of everything. But I think the big proponent is that gaming every single week with the same group of players, it can get daunting if the ideas and the things that you're looking to have accomplished and the players who have free reign to do as they will, not staying to the story. And, it just comes time all right, guys, I'm kind of lost here. I need a break.
Hence the burnout. What do we got next?
The next is a very damaging one. And it can not only have an issue with the group, an issue with, loss of friendship, but that's going to be group conflict. Whether it be something that actually happens within the game itself or an interpersonal situation that has nothing to do with the game itself, but something that's happened outside of the group. Two people or two players have an issue with something that's transpired, and it causes a separation within the group itself.
Yeah, more often than not, this is not actually a game problem. It has, it doesn't, it can manifest in the game, but it's not really because of the game, I would say. It has more to do with the conflict of personalities. Like you said, sometimes it's something outside the game. Maybe some of your gaming group are dating each other, and those relationships end. Well, they're not always pretty when they do. Maybe one person gets to the gaming group in the separation, and the other doesn't. This can cause all kinds of sticky situations, messy situations. Also, outside of dating, just personal relationships that fall apart for whatever reason. Two of your players no longer get together or get along together, and it is no longer fun to be around both of them because it just bleeds out into the rest of the group.
Sometimes it's a belief situation, whether it's religious or personal. It can affect when all of a sudden an information about this person comes out and someone at the table doesn't happen to agree with or forces their belief upon another. We like to be accepting and everybody, is welcome at the table, but that might not be so for everyone that you're gaming with. So this can cause, two people to no longer speak henceforth.
Yeah, and they can start coming out in the game, and then it kind of changes how you see each other personally, and it creates, as we stated, group conflict.
So what's next?
All right, so this one has plagued gaming groups since the dawn of time, I feel like. And that is just player and DM or GM inconsistency. You guys are all ready to game, and the GM is hang now, don't feel like it. Or, one of your players is always late. They show up whenever they want. Maybe they're going to come to the game. Maybe they're not. Maybe they'll tell you. Maybe they won't. this makes it really hard on everybody at the table. When the players do it, it makes it hard for the GM because, in essence, in theory, the GM is prepping for the players and characters that they're going to have at the table. Well, that becomes infinitely more difficult when you don't know what configuration of your group is actually going to be assembled this evening.
A lot of DMs do advanced prep. So if you've got a 4 or 5 player game that's consistently there, but you've got one player who's very wishy-washy, you don't know whether they're going to be there or not. Does the DM plan for what's expected? And if it's less, well, that makes it more challenging. Or if it's more, does that make it easier? How much work are you really expecting of your GM? Dave and I have come up with things of what we do to kind of handle things, but the inexperienced GM might not be able to do all of those little tricks and tactics. So it gets to be really challenging because you just never know. There's some groups that they refuse to play if the whole table's not there. They don't want to deal with, well, where's Bob tonight? Where's Gina, this time? It doesn't, they can't handle that. We play if everybody's here, and if not, we do this other activity. We hang out, we watch a movie, we play a board game, whatever.
Yeah, also narratively, it creates challenges and problems if you care about such thing, and a lot of GMs and players do. So I believe we have one more on our list.
So the last one is DM and or players losing interest in the game. And some of this can tie into some of the other things that are there. The DM burning out can put less and less work into a particular campaign because they're losing interest in it, because they're overwhelmed, because they're overworked. The players are caring less and less about what's going on because of possibly some conflict or what have you. They're losing interest in the game. And all of that boils down to someone else possibly saying, well, I've got a great idea. And now we move on to a whole nother story.
It can literally be its own problem, or it can be like a root cause of some of the other problems. You're absolutely correct there.
So, as that new idea, whether it be the GM says, well, let's put this campaign on hold and pick up something else, or another GM says, hey, I've got this great idea, why don't we start? And that's been, our experience for many years of, the DM asks for a break, new story starts, new set of characters, new GM, and we never go back and complete, previous campaigns. Before we get into the possible fixes for each of these scenarios, if you like these videos and you'd like to help keep us making more, why not head over to Patreon and support us over there?
Over on Patreon, as a special thank you, every month you'll receive 5e content for both players and dungeon masters alike. We've got maps from our very own games, drop-in encounters. Sometimes we make magic items, new races, subclasses, feats, spells, you name it. We do it, probably do it over there at some point or another. There's even a chance to game with Nerdarchy and more. There will be a link down in the description.
All right, so now that we've actually, identified these 4 major causes of campaigns faltering, let's actually go in and look at some of the solutions, some of the things that we can do to fix this. So first up, let's look at that DM burn.
So this one, I feel like this one has happened in our games a lot. It's one of the root causes. A GM just burns out on a particular campaign or loses interest in the idea. And then they're just like, you know what? Or they just got a new idea and they're like, and that's kind of refreshed them. So they've burned out on the old campaign and they want to do something new. Problem with this is you're never, ever going to probably get back to that old campaign.
So, these are just, some generic advice for those. If you are having this problem, this is a great way to kind of help bolster this. If not really your issue, your problem, then, just, wait for the next one.
But so, the main thing is here, right, is as the Dungeon Master, as the GM of the particular game, when you start it, you need to know your limits. You need to know what you're capable of, and what your kind of endurance is for the campaign, how much time you really need. So there's definitely things you can do. Like we've done this in our own game, and this has been super successful. Is we just alternate the GM or DM so that while we play pretty much almost every Saturday, we're not playing the same game every Saturday. So me as the GM, I have weeks to prep before my next session. And in between that, I even get to play as a player, and I get to experience like another GM style and other players, playing their characters, and I get to interact with them. So I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, gaming every single week for, infinitum is definitely a problem for me. Not knowing exactly when this campaign is going to end, that has a problem. But if you've got the ability to set the limits of, I know how long this particular campaign is expected to last, and I'm not gaming every single week with me as the GM, that frees up a lot of stress, and it allows it to make it a lot easier. Now, this isn't always possible if your group wants to meet every week and you're the forever GM. But, hopefully your group can encourage one of the members to say, you know what, even if we're going to run one-shots, even if we're going to do like mini arcs, step in and, give your shot at a DM, because that will free up a lot of space for the DM who is overstressed.
The RAM. But even if not, right, another thing you almost touched on and then you veered away from is that is like setting the campaign, like the number of sessions you're going to play, because it becomes, even if you're the forever GM and we're like, well, this campaign is only going to be 6 sessions, right? It's really easy to add more if you get to the 6. But it's very important that you it's almost like a contract that you renew with your players at the end of whatever that number is, and you renew it for a set number. It switches gears in your brain as a dungeon master, as a game master, on thinking about the campaign in an arc. Like, it starts here. This is where you're going to get to. You have X amount of sessions to do it. And what that does is, for me anyway, it helps me complete the campaign. Every time. We've done it quite successfully in your game. We've done a bunch of games like that. And even if you want to just keep going with that game afterwards, but you just extend it out a little bit, I think that's just super helpful, because it's so daunting when you're just like, oh, this is what I'm doing for the end of time.
Perfect example. Again, this is not a game that you can see online. It's our home game. But I ran a session. I consider this my second campaign for 5th edition. It was a set number of players. We said we're going to do a 12-session story arc. And when that 12 sessions was completed, we told a whole story. And then some of those players wanted to continue the story and keep those characters, where others were like, yeah, I'm interested in starting a new character. So we introduced some new characters, we dropped a couple of players, and the story wound up continuing. So, it wound up being a little bit refreshing to allow those who wanted to make new characters, while those who wanted to keep theirs were able to continue them. And the new story is only loosely affected by what happened in the previous game. So, not too big a deal on the new characters.
So, kind of to like two of the things we mentioned about GM burnout. One is, we briefly mentioned alternating GMs to give a break, but also set number of sessions of the campaign. We do stream a game live on Nerdarchy Live, our other YouTube channel, where we rotate GMs, and for 12 sessions, the GM takes over the reins and runs a game. Is just another perfect example. So those campaigns always kind of have a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion. So, just implementing this in all the different play methods that we have has greatly increased the number of campaigns that we've actually, finished.
That 12-session story arc with an alternating or rotating GM, the group is the same. We've got the 5 of us, and every 12 sessions, we take a week off, we take a session 0, and, then we start the new campaign. For us, we've got a little bit of D&D and some other rule sets mixed in. But if, you're interested in alternating rule sets and GMs, that's a great way to try out new things and experiment with new styles of games, as well as new styles of play. We've seen post-apocalyptic, we've seen regular fantasy, we've seen, future fantasy, we're looking at grim fantasy and space. So, we've got all of these different genres and rule sets and fun things that are different, allowing the interest levels to kind of be peaked. And then we kind of rotate. And when we complete everyone's, do we go back to the original game, or do we pick up a new storyline? So there's lots of options, a lot of fun things that can be done.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned session 0. You're going to hear us mention that over and over again. It helps set expectations, and that's where the GM would be like, this game is going to run for 12 sessions, 6 sessions, whatever. This is what we're doing. So next up, we have group conflict, and how do we solve it?
Man, group conflict is absolutely a rough situation. I guess it kind of like you have to start off of, well, what are the people fighting over? What is the root cause of the conflict?
Well, before we get to that, let's just what are some of the things that we've seen at our own table? So I can only imagine other people have seen similar things.
Well, I mean, I kind of, loosely touched on the whole idea of belief. With D&D, there's, spells that allow you to kind of loosely control others. And we had a situation where there was a player who was a pure atheist, so much so that they were not willing to have a character who believed or, worshipped gods. And in the particular game I was playing, there was a tradition of before you got on a boat, you offered some kind of onus or prayer to the god of the seas. I was not aware of this particular player's adamant belief structure. Neither was anyone else at the table. So when the bard charmed the fighter into doing some kind of pittance, there was then a death threat issued at the table while I'm sitting there at the DM seat like, how do I handle this?
Yeah, I mean, we've had that come up. We've had, people are just jerks at the table sometimes, and one player was being teased a lot, and they thought a particular person was teasing them. Turns out it wasn't actually what was happening. But one person jumps up and puts another person in a headlock. So we've had physical altercations. We've had people argue and fight over loot in the game. We've had people fight over, differences in role playing, and, up until the point where they were so into that's what my character would do, that it breaks out into PvP. All of which the solutions to these really are session 0, defining what's acceptable to your table, what's not, and also most important I think is, what do we do when there is a conflict? How do we resolve it at this table? Let us all agree, and we can't move forward as a group until we all agree on this is conflict resolution at our table. So when something does happen, we go back to that and go, well, you agreed that we would resolve this particular way, or everyone can say that, right? And and then hopefully you'll have the tools in place to make it easier for you to get past whatever that problem was. And again, this comes down to having a session 0, and including a bit of a social contract into that, something that you all agree on when it comes to conflict resolution.
Now, we've mentioned this in other videos in the past. While session 0 is labeled that, it does not necessarily have to be the first session. If a problem happens at the table and you're not able to come to proper terms, whether it's mid-session or in between sessions, you can have a session 0 and you can work out, any of these problems. You can work out these group conflicts of all right, well, we didn't have a social construct before or a social contract before, so let's work on this. How are we going to move forward? Now, is this going to be a scenario where Jim's just not accepted back in the group? Is this a conversation where Mark's not welcome back at the table, or is this something that we can shake hands and we can say, look, all of this is happening because of game. That item that you were fighting over, what happens if it's not there? How can we figure this out? Can we figure out a way to dumb the item down and you both get a lesser version? Is there something that's going to make everyone happy, including, DM players, so that the story can move forward, so that friendships can be maintained?
Also, since we were now mentioning session 0s and social contracts, I would recommend to you that you do your social contract prior to the session 0 elements of that gathering. So handle the social stuff before the game stuff. We find it more useful, and also in our session 0s, a lot of narrative stuff comes up. So before you get into that narrative stuff, it would be really good for everyone at the table to agree on the directions that narrative can go into.
And there's loads of things that you can do online. There's definitely examples of social contracts and what to ask in session 0. But I mean, if you know going in, well, these narrative elements that might cause a problem for you, if you let the DM know not to include something that might trigger you, you can have that element avoided because the DM has been aware. If I was aware of these concepts before and enough wherewithal to ask my players of, hey, what kind of thing sets you off, I never would have had this thing that was supposed to just be a fun element in my world, and I would not have caused that trigger situation for the player, causing the other player to act and allowing the story to continue with a player very much upset. So next up is the inconsistency, whether you're talking about players showing up, inconsistency, within, the material at play. All of these things kind of fall into, this concept of not everything's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of some of the things that we do. One is set a schedule. Everyone stick to it. Like we do that. We have 3 different DMs, 3 different weekends. The groups are different. They're not all the same group, but that's perfect because that allows for those people to set a schedule that they can stick with and that will work for them. Set a number of sessions. I'm making it, so all your players, they're committing to 6 weeks. Or 6 months, depending on how often you're getting together, whatever, but they know what to expect and what is expected of them. This is something you cover in session 0 before any play begins. Everyone agrees to it. And when you kind of have this verbal contract with everyone via session 0, I feel like people tend to be more considerate of everyone's time at the table, and we all put it on our calendar. And it just makes it easier. Maybe you need to use something like Google Invites so that everyone gets a reminder, right? That, this is when we're doing the thing. And it is a real commitment indeed. It is on the calendar.
It's kind of ridiculous, but, as noted by the fact that, we've been doing YouTube videos for, over 7 years now, RPGs have been a major passion of mine. And, I committed to the group, many, many years ago. We game every Saturday night, and I was not willing to do anything, when throughout the many years I've had numerous jobs. Saturday night was not an option, was not a thing for me that I was ever available, short of dire situations. And I, as nerdy as this is, never really had to go through, those majors. Yeah, I can't make it tonight, And there's some people that they're not interested, they're not willing to make that kind of commitment. But you need to figure out what works for you and what works for your group. We mentioned the social contract. There are some people who go beyond this is what we're verbally agreeing to, and they actually have a written thing that's printed out, passed out to all the players. They fill out the information and physically sign it so that it is not a verbal contract, but a written contract turned into the GM. I don't think anyone's really pulling out the lawyers. I haven't heard any of those stories. But
you're taking your rules lawyer to the next level.
But you could be like, look, you agreed to this. I've got your signature. You need to stop, and we need to move forward based on what all of us literally agreed to via these signatures. So if you need to go that far, please go that far to save friendships and your games.
Or maybe just find a new group that you don't have to make them sign. Or make them sign in blood, it becomes a Warlock Pact. I don't know. Whatever works for your particular group and gets this inconsistency problem solved.
All right, so what's our last problem that we're getting into?
Our last problem to solve is loss of interest, right? And there's a couple ways that we can do this. And one, first and foremost, is set expectations. Where do we set our expectations? Session 0, right? You know what game you signed up for. You know what to expect. Hopefully in that session 0, everyone's come up with some cool things for the GM to use, which leads us right into the other thing that is super useful.
And that's going to be, your investment in the game. Not only as a GM, but as players, you need to have buy-in. And, we talked about session 0 over and over again. But if you have a concept of what the game is, then all right, session 0 is when you can tie yourself to the other characters. A number of rule sets outside of D&D literally ties your characters to the other characters in the game. I know Cypher System is very much into that. I know Monster of the Week is very much into that. I know Dungeon World is very much into that. So you could kind of look into any of those rule sets and adopt those things to tie your characters in a D&D game to each other so that you know how things are going to work. If you don't want to use the hardcore rule set, just talk about it. How do you know each other? Even if you take, there's 5 players in a group. All right, well, you 3 know each other and you 2 know each other. And, the first session is going to start with you 2 groups meeting each other. All right, we agree on that.
Even better. I'm just going to cut that off right now because just as the GM go, you 5 are together in an adventuring party. You tell me how, right? And let those 5 players figure it out. And if you're the GM, maybe you take some notes while they're discussing it if it's in session 0. What this does is this makes them vested in the group. They're invested in the party. Maybe they're even invested in the other player characters now because they're coming up with all these great ideas, reasons, stories, and narratives based on why their group is together. And you as a dungeon master can free your mind and mental capacity to putting anything towards that. You can just work on the campaign and the adventures you want to write. They figured that out. Maybe you take some of their ideas that they mentioned and you write that into your campaign, which will, again, give you some more investment in the campaign. But I feel like that is the biggest thing you can do to get the players invested in their characters and each other.
And that second game that I had started, the 12-session story arc, that's what I did. And the group was the 7 who stayed. And they crafted this whole narrative of a problem that was put out there. And they came up with what the problem was, and that no one else was interested in solving the problem except the 7 who stayed. And that was their adventuring group. And it was amusing and comical with all of the different narratives that they came up with. So it's absolutely a part of what's going on. So once you have the narrative of the characters worked out, there's still the possibility of looking at what is going on with your individual character related to the overarching story. When Nerder Doug approached us about continuing ingest quests that we have on the main channel on the live channel, I was all in. I really enjoyed the first season, and now I get to be a part of it. So I started coming up with, all right, how does my character get affected by all of this food related stuff? And even though it's not a D&D game, you could still find aspects to say what is important. So I attached myself not only to the idea, but even the original story. And I worked with a DM of how that's affected my character and his ongoing stuff.
There's a lot of ways to, head the loss of interest off. And it all starts with session 0, getting the shared expectations together. And then, the players investing in the game and the campaign that you're going to run, and the GM doing the same. Hopefully you found these suggestions helpful. If you have any ideas or suggestions of your own, why don't you share them with the Nerdarchy community down below?
While you're down there, why not help out the YouTube algorithm and make Nerdarchy happy by doing all those fun things like, share, subscribe, even go ahead and click on that notification bell.
Quick reminder, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we drop new videos. Come check them out. Can't wait till then. We got you covered. Up here in the card, you will find a D&D Session 0. Start your gaming groups awesomely. You can go check that out since we talked so much about Session 0 in this episode.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.